The mortgage statement arrived on a Tuesday. It wasn't hidden. It wasn't addressed to another woman. It wasn't slipped into the mailbox by mistake. It came with the rest of our mail, mixed between a grocery coupon, an electric bill, and a postcard from my sister in Arizona. If I hadn't reached for the stack first, I probably never would have seen it. And my husband would have gone on believing I still knew everything about our life. I thought we were struggling to pay for one house. I had no idea he'd been paying for two. People imagine life-changing discoveries as loud, dramatic moments. Mine happened while I was standing barefoot in my kitchen, waiting for pasta water to boil. The dog was asleep under the table. The local news droned quietly from the television. Outside, a lawn service was trimming hedges across the street. Nothing about that Tuesday suggested my marriage was about to split into two versions. The one I thought I'd been living, and the one that had been quietly unfolding without me. My name is Emma Carter. I'm 46 years old, a middle school counselor. And until that afternoon, I would have described my marriage with one word: steady. Not perfect. Nobody's is. Ryan forgot anniversaries unless I reminded him. I left coffee mugs all over the house. He hated clutter. I hated folding laundry. We argued about thermostat settings every winter like it was a competitive sport. Normal things. The kind of small disagreements that become inside jokes after 17 years together. If you'd asked me whether I trusted my husband, I wouldn't have hesitated. I'd have said yes before you finished the question. Money had been tight for a while. Not desperate. Just careful. We drove older cars, skipped vacations more often than we took them. When friends talked about remodeling kitchens or buying lake houses, Ryan usually smiled and changed the subject. "We're doing fine," he'd tell me later. "We just have different priorities." I believed him. Honestly, I admired him for it. Ryan never chased bigger houses or expensive trucks. He'd always said peace was worth more than appearances. It was one of the reasons I'd fallen in love with him. That afternoon, I sorted through the mail while stirring the pasta. Electric bill, insurance renewal, coupon, junk. Then I reached the last envelope. Plain white. No window. The return address belonged to a mortgage company I recognized immediately. I smiled. "Finally," I muttered. Ryan had been talking about refinancing for months. Maybe the paperwork had finally come through. I slid my thumb beneath the flap. Not because I was snooping, because that's what we'd always done. Whoever grabbed the mail opened it. Neither of us had ever cared. 17 years of shared checking accounts, shared taxes, shared bills. Privacy had never been something we measured with envelopes. The first page slid halfway out. I glanced down, then stopped. The property address wasn't ours. I blinked, read it again. Still wrong. Maybe they'd mailed us someone else's statement. It happens. I looked at the name. Ryan Carter. Correct. I checked the address underneath his name. Our home address. Also correct. Only the property being financed wasn't. I read the street name again. I'd never heard of it. Not once. The front door opened. Ryan walked in carrying his lunch cooler. "Something smells good." Pasta. Perfect. He leaned over and kissed my cheek before hanging his keys on the hook by the door. The mortgage statement was still in my hands. For one strange second, I almost held it up and asked the obvious question. Ryan, what's this? Instead, I watched him. He loosened his work boots, scratched behind the dog's ears, walked to the sink to wash his hands. Every movement was familiar, comfortable, ordinary. There wasn't a single hint that he'd walked into a house where his biggest secret was sitting on the kitchen counter. At dinner, we talked about Lily's college applications. Our daughter wanted to study environmental science somewhere close enough to visit on weekends. Ryan teased her that she'd probably end up correcting everyone's recycling habits. She rolled her eyes. Dad, that's literally not what environmental science is. I'm just preparing myself. You should. The conversation felt effortless. We laughed, passed the garlic bread, argued over whether pineapple belonged on pizza. If someone had secretly recorded that dinner, they would have seen a happy family. Maybe we were. Maybe that's what made the secret so confusing. Nothing felt fake. Ryan looked at me the same way he always had. He reached for my hand while we cleared the table. He thanked me for dinner. He even reminded Lily to drive carefully when she left to study with a friend. There wasn't a crack in the picture. Not one. Later that night, Ryan fell asleep on the couch before the end of a baseball game. I stood in the doorway watching him. One arm across his chest, reading glasses slipping down his nose. The remote balanced awkwardly against his leg. This man still left me little notes in my lunch on stressful weeks. He still warmed my car on icy mornings. He still called every day around noon, just to ask, "Did you remember to eat?" People don't usually imagine those men keeping life-changing secrets. Then again, maybe that's exactly why they can. I carried the mortgage statement upstairs, not to hide it, to read it again. This time, slowly. Monthly payment. Current balance. Loan number. Everything looked legitimate. Whoever owned that house had been making payments for years. I turned to the second page. That's when I noticed something I'd somehow missed before. The payment wasn't new. The account had been active for almost 12 years. 12 years. I sat down on the edge of the bed because my knees suddenly didn't feel steady. 12 years wasn't a forgotten investment. It wasn't paperwork waiting to... Can't be explained. It was an entire chapter of my husband's life. One I had never known existed. And for the first time in 17 years, I found myself wondering a question I never believed I'd have to ask. Who exactly had I married? I didn't sleep much that night. Not because I was angry. Anger would have been easier. Anger gives you something to do. You confront. You argue. You demand answers. What kept me awake was uncertainty. Every explanation I came up with seemed equally possible. A paperwork mistake. An investment property he'd forgotten to mention. A loan he'd co-signed for someone. Then my mind wandered somewhere darker. Another family. Another life. Another version of Ryan that had existed alongside ours for 12 years. Every time that thought surfaced, I pushed it away. Not because I knew it was wrong, because I wanted it to be. Ryan was already awake when I came downstairs. He stood at the counter making pancakes. Saturday morning, his specialty. The radio played softly while he flipped one onto a plate with the confidence of a man who'd done it 1,000 times. He looked over his shoulder and smiled. "Morning, sleepyhead." I didn't realize it was Saturday already. "You earned it." He slid another pancake onto the stack. "Coffee's ready." I poured myself a cup and watched him. There was flour on his t-shirt, a tiny streak across his wrist. He caught me staring. "What?" "Nothing." "You've got that counselor face." I frowned. "What counselor face?" "The one where you're trying to figure out what's wrong with somebody." I laughed automatically. "I do not have a counselor face." "You absolutely do." He pointed the spatula at me. "It's terrifying." For a second, everything felt normal again. Then I remembered the envelope folded neatly inside my bedside drawer. Lily wandered downstairs wearing one of Ryan's old college sweatshirts. She kissed the top of his head as she walked by. "Morning, Dad." "Morning, Moo." She groaned. "You promised you'd stop calling me that before college." "I promised I'd think about it." "You promised." "I remember it differently." She looked at me. "See what I deal with?" Every day. The three of us laughed. It should have made me feel better. Instead, it made me wonder how long Ryan had been carrying two realities at once. After breakfast, Lily left to meet a friend. Ryan headed outside to change the oil in my SUV. I stood at the kitchen window watching him. He worked methodically. No phone calls, no nervous pacing, no secretive behavior. Just Ryan. The same man I'd watched fix bicycles, build bookshelves, and shovel snow before sunrise so I wouldn't slip walking to my car. I asked myself a question I wasn't prepared to answer. What if I wanted to believe him, more than I wanted the truth? Around noon, Ryan came back inside, wiping his hands with an old shop towel. "Keys are on the counter." "Thanks." He opened the refrigerator. "We're out of orange juice. I'll grab some later." "I can go. You've already done enough today." He shrugged. "I don't mind." Then his eyes drifted toward the small stack of mail I'd left on the counter. Not dramatically. Not suspiciously. Just for a fraction of a second. His smile faded. So, he picked up an advertisement from the pile. "Anything important come yesterday?" My heart skipped. The question sounded casual. Almost too casual. I kept my voice steady. "Just bills." He nodded once. "Anything else?" There it was. A second question. Almost identical to the first. I looked directly at him. "No." He held my gaze for another second, then smiled. "Good." He grabbed his truck keys. "I'll be back in 20 minutes. The front door closed behind him. I didn't move. That conversation lasted less than 30 seconds. But one thing suddenly became impossible to ignore. Ryan had never asked about the mail. Not once in 17 years. The second his truck disappeared down the street, I went upstairs. The mortgage statement was exactly where I'd left it. I spread every page across the bed. This time, I forced myself to stop looking for explanations. Instead, I looked for facts. The property was located in a town called Lake Mercer, about 45 minutes from our home. The loan had been opened 11 years and 8 months earlier. The monthly payment wasn't enormous, but it wasn't small either. Enough to explain why we'd postponed vacations, why Ryan always volunteered for overtime, why every conversation about replacing the kitchen cabinets somehow ended with, maybe next year. A chill ran through me. What if we'd never actually been
What if we'd just been paying for a life I didn't know existed? I opened my laptop, not to investigate Ryan. At least, that's what I told myself. I just wanted to see the house. The address appeared almost immediately. A real estate website still had old listing photos from years ago. I clicked the first image. A modest white craftsman home. Nothing extravagant. 3 bedrooms, a wraparound porch, flower beds lining the front walkway. It wasn't a mansion. It wasn't a vacation home. It looked loved. I flipped through the rest of the photos. The kitchen, the living room, the backyard. Then one picture stopped me. A wooden swing hanging from a massive oak tree. For some reason, that swing bothered me more than the mortgage itself. Because somebody had built it. Somebody had laughed there. Somebody had called that place home. And somehow, Ryan was connected to it. I closed the laptop. I had a choice. I could wait for Ryan to come home and finally ask the question that had been sitting in my chest for 24 hours. Or I could drive to Lake Mercer myself. I stared at the address one last time, then reached for my car keys. For the first time since opening that envelope, I made a decision without asking my husband. And I had a feeling it wouldn't be the last. The drive to Lake Mercer took 43 minutes. I know because I watched every minute tick by on the dashboard clock. At first, I almost turned around. Then, I almost called Ryan. Then I almost convinced myself I was overreacting. By the time I reached the city limits, I talked myself into at least 6 different explanations. An investment, a mistake, a favor for a friend, Inheritance,
a family.
he'd forgotten to mention. Every explanation sounded reasonable. Every explanation depended on one thing: that I still knew the man I'd married. Lake Mercer wasn't what I'd expected. The name made it sound like a vacation town filled with expensive lakefront homes. Instead, it felt ordinary. Tree-lined streets, a small bakery on the corner, a hardware store with faded paint, kids riding bicycles without parents hovering nearby. It looked like the kind of town where people still waved at strangers. The address led me into a quiet neighborhood. No gates, no luxury homes, just well-kept houses with trimmed lawns and flower gardens. I slowed the SUV. The GPS announced, "You have arrived." My hands stayed on the steering wheel.
The White House stood exactly where the listing photos had shown it. The wraparound porch, the oak tree, the wooden swing. Nothing had changed. Except one thing. Someone still lived there. A blue SUV sat in the driveway. Flower pots lined the front steps. Wind chimes moved gently in the afternoon breeze. This wasn't an abandoned property Ryan had forgotten to sell. This was someone's home. I stayed in the car. 5 minutes. Then 10. I felt ridiculous. If anyone looked out the window, I'd seem like a woman spying on complete strangers. Because that's exactly what I was doing. I reached for the ignition. Go home, Emma. Before I could start the engine, the front door opened. An older woman stepped onto the porch. She looked to be in her early 70s. Silver hair, jeans, a light blue cardigan despite the warm weather. She carried a small watering can and began watering the flowers along the porch rail. There was nothing unusual about her. Nothing mysterious. She looked like someone's grandmother. She even smiled at a little boy riding past on his bike. He smiled. I watched for another minute, then another. If Ryan had a secret second life, it certainly didn't look the way I'd imagined. My phone buzzed. Ryan. I stared at the screen until it almost stopped ringing before answering. Hey. Hi. His voice sounded cheerful. You busy? I looked through the windshield at the White House. Just running errands. Good. There was a pause. I forgot to ask you something. What? Did the mail come yesterday? The question hit me like cold water. I forced myself to answer naturally. Yeah. Anything important? There it was again. Not once in 17 years had Ryan cared about the mail. Now, twice in 2 days. No. Another brief pause. Okay. You all right? Yeah. You just sound far away. He hesitated. I looked at the house. I guess I'm tired. Get some rest. I will. I love you. The words came automatically. I love you too. The call ended. I lowered the phone slowly. He hadn't asked about my day. He hadn't asked where I was. He'd called to ask about the mail. Again. I waited another 20 minutes. No one came. No one left. Finally, I stepped out of the SUV. My heart pounded with every step toward the sidewalk. I wasn't planning to knock. I told myself I just wanted a closer look. The mailbox stood near the curb. The brass flag had been polished recently. Fresh footprints marked the walkway after someone had watered the flowers. Everything about the house suggested care. Not wealth. Not secrecy. Care. As I reached the mailbox, I heard a car door close somewhere behind me. I turned instinctively. A delivery van pulled away from the next house. Nothing unusual. I let out the breath I'd been holding. Then I noticed something on the porch. A brown paper grocery bag. Someone had left it beside the front door. The older woman opened the door, picked it up, and smiled. She looked around the empty street, as if hoping to thank whoever had brought it
but no one was there. She carried the groceries inside. The door closed. My eyes stayed fixed on the empty porch. Whoever had delivered those groceries had left before she answered, almost as if they didn't want to be seen. I returned to my SUV feeling more confused than when I'd arrived. Nothing I'd seen pointed to an affair. Nothing suggested Ryan had another family. Yet something was undeniably happening. As I backed out of the street, my eyes caught something in the rearview mirror. A dark gray pickup truck turned the corner. My breath caught. It looked exactly like Ryan's. Same model, same color, same ladder rack mounted over the bed. I froze. The truck slowed, then pulled into the driveway of the White House. I couldn't see the driver's face, only the back of a man climbing out with another brown paper grocery bag in his hand. He walked toward the front porch with the easy confidence of someone who had been there many times before. Then the front door opened. The older woman smiled the moment she saw him, and before I could see who he was, a school bus rolled between us, blocking my view for only 3 seconds. When it passed, the front door was closed, and the man was gone. For a moment, I couldn't breathe. The school bus had blocked my view for less than 3 seconds. 3 seconds. That was all it took for the man to disappear inside the house. I stared at the closed front door. My heart pounded so hard it hurt. Was that Ryan? I couldn't answer the question. The truck looked like his. The jacket looked like his. Even the way he carried the grocery bag looked familiar. But I hadn't seen his face. And right now, that difference mattered. I drove home trying to convince myself I was mistaken. Hundreds of contractors owned gray pickup trucks. Half the men in our county dressed exactly the same. I was letting fear connect dots that didn't belong together. By the time I pulled into our driveway, I'd almost talked myself down. Then I saw Ryan's truck, parked in the garage. The engine was still warm. I rested my hand on the hood. He'd been home long enough for the dog to greet him. Long enough to change out of his work boots. Long enough for me to realize something. If that had been Ryan in Lake Mercer, he'd made it home surprisingly fast. Too fast. He was in the backyard, cleaning leaves out of the gutter. He looked down when he heard the gate. Hey. You were gone a while. So were you. He smiled. Hardware store. I nodded. I stopped for coffee after. He climbed down the ladder. Did you find everything you needed? What do you mean? You said you were running errands. Right. I'd forgotten my own excuse. I did. What'd you buy? The question sounded harmless, but it caught me off guard. I searched my memory. Cleaning supplies. He laughed. You forgot the cleaning supplies? I looked down at my empty hands. Then I laughed too. I guess I did. Ryan walked over and kissed my forehead. That's all right. Happens to the best of us. His smile never changed. But something about that conversation stayed with me.
Ryan wasn't suspicious. He was
checking, almost as if he wanted to know exactly where I'd been. That night, we ordered Chinese takeout. Lily spent dinner talking about a documentary she'd watched for biology class. Ryan listened carefully, asked questions, made jokes. He wasn't distracted. He wasn't staring at his phone. He wasn't acting guilty. If anything, he seemed unusually present, which somehow made everything worse. After dinner, Lily headed upstairs. Ryan carried the empty containers into the kitchen. I'll take out the trash. I'll help. We tied the garbage bags together. One ripped. Orange peels rolled across the floor. Ryan groaned dramatically. Don't tell anyone this happened. I'll take it to my grave. We've got a reputation. For what? He grinned. Competence. I laughed despite myself. That was Ryan. Always finding humor in small disasters. It was one of the things I'd loved about him from the beginning. Later that evening, he fell asleep in his recliner while watching an old Western. I stayed awake. Not watching television. Watching him. The lines around his eyes looked deeper than I remembered. His hands were rough from years of construction work. A small scar crossed his left thumb. I'd watched him get that scar while building Lily a treehouse when she was 10. How many memories could one person share with someone and still have an entire secret life? Around 11, Ryan's phone buzzed on the side table. The screen lit up. Just for a second. I wasn't trying to invade his privacy. Honestly, I wasn't even close enough to read the message. But I did see one thing. The preview disappeared almost immediately because his phone was locked. Only the sender's name remained on the screen. G. Holloway. My stomach dropped. Holloway. The name on the mailbox. The older woman. Grace. Before I could process another thought, Ryan opened his eyes. Not fully, just enough to notice the glowing screen. He reached over, picked up the phone, and looked at it. His expression changed, only slightly. The smile disappeared. The tiredness returned. Without saying a word, he stood up. I'm going to bed. You aren't going to answer it? He looked back at me. For half a second, I thought he hadn't heard the question. Then he slipped the phone into his pocket. It can wait until morning. He walked upstairs. I sat alone in the quiet living room. If Grace was texting him late at night, then whatever connected them wasn't over. It was happening right now. The next morning was Sunday. Ryan woke before sunrise. That wasn't unusual. What was unusual was that he was fully dressed before 6. Steel-toe boots, work jeans, light jacket. I frowned. I thought you weren't working today. I'm not. He avoided my eyes while tying his boots. I just need to run out for an hour. Where? He picked up his truck keys. Nowhere important. Then he smiled. I'll bring donuts. The front door closed. I waited exactly 1 minute before walking to the front window. Ryan backed out of the driveway. Instead of turning toward town, he turned toward the highway, toward Lake Mercer. I stood there until his truck disappeared. Then I looked at the clock. 6:07 a.m.
For the first time since opening the mortgage statement, I made a decision that scared me. Next time, I wasn't going to follow the house. I was going to follow my husband. I barely slept Sunday night. Not because I was planning to follow Ryan. Because I was trying to convince myself not to. Every marriage deserves trust. Every person deserves privacy. I believed both of those things. The problem was, trust had started asking me to ignore evidence. And that wasn't trust anymore. That was denial. Monday morning began exactly the way every Monday had for the past 17 years. Ryan
Kissed me goodbye before leaving for work. Love you. Love you too. He grabbed his lunch cooler, his travel mug, his keys. Then he stopped. Don't forget. What? Your dentist appointment after work. I blinked. I completely forgot. He smiled. That's why you married me. No. I smiled back. I married you because you make better pancakes. He laughed. I'll take that. Then he left. I stood at the front window until his truck disappeared around the corner. If anyone had watched us that morning, they would have seen a happy couple. And maybe we still were. That was the hardest part. Nothing about Ryan's love felt fake. Only his honesty did. At work, I couldn't focus. One student was explaining why he'd gotten into a fight during recess. Normally, I would have noticed every emotion behind his words. Instead, my mind kept replaying the same question. Why Monday? Grace had texted him Sunday night. He'd driven somewhere before sunrise. And now, he was back at work like nothing had happened. There was a pattern. I just couldn't see it yet. At lunch, my coworker Denise sat across from me in the faculty lounge. You look exhausted. I didn't sleep well. Everything okay? I almost told her. Almost. Instead, I smiled. Just thinking too much. She laughed. You're a counselor. Thinking too much is literally your job. Normally, I would have laughed too. Today, I couldn't. Around 4 o'clock, my dentist appointment ended earlier than expected. As I walked to my car, my phone buzzed. Ryan. Hey. How'd it go? No cavities. I knew you'd make us proud. I rolled my eyes. I'll try to stay humble. He chuckled. I've got one more stop before I head home. What kind of stop? There was the briefest pause. Supplier issue. Everything all right? Yeah. I'll probably be an hour late. Okay. I'll see you soon. The call ended. I looked at the time. 4:18 p.m. Lake Mercer was 45 minutes away. Without allowing myself another excuse, I started the engine. The highway felt strangely familiar now, almost routine. This time, I wasn't driving to the house. I parked across the street from a small grocery store just outside the neighborhood. I didn't know why. It was simply the first place that gave me a clear view of the main road leading toward Grace's Street. At 5:02, Ryan's truck drove past. There was no construction trailer behind it, no company logo, just Ryan. He pulled into the grocery store parking lot. I watched from 3 rows away. He grabbed a shopping basket instead of a cart. He moved with purpose, like someone buying the same things he'd bought dozens of times before. Milk, bread, eggs, fresh fruit, soup, prescription pickup, flowers. Flowers. Not roses, just a small bouquet of yellow daisies. The kind you buy because someone smiles when they see them, not because you're trying to impress anyone. I followed him from a distance through the store. He greeted the cashier by name. "Afternoon, Melissa." "Hi, Ryan." "The usual?" "You know me." She smiled while scanning the groceries. "You spoil her." Ryan laughed quietly. She'd disagree. Melissa shook her head. No, she wouldn't. My heart tightened. The cashier knew him. She knew this routine, which meant this wasn't new. Ryan loaded the groceries into his truck. I waited until he drove away before pulling out behind him. This time, I stayed far enough back that I lost sight of him twice at traffic lights. When I turned onto Grace's Street, his truck was already parked in the driveway. I parked around the corner and walked. Slowly, quietly. As I reached the sidewalk, I heard laughter. Not romantic laughter, not flirting. Just 2 people enjoying each other's company. Grace opened the front door before Ryan could knock. "You brought too much again." "I brought exactly enough. I can still shop for myself." "I know." "Then why do you keep ignoring me?" Ryan smiled. "Because you're terrible at accepting help." Grace folded her arms. "I am not. You argued with me for 10 minutes over a loaf of bread last week. That's because it was sourdough. It was on sale. It still wasn't the right bread." Ryan laughed. "So that's the hill you're choosing?" It absolutely is. For just a second, they looked almost like family. Comfortable, familiar, safe. There was affection between them, but it wasn't the kind I'd spent days imagining. Then Grace noticed something. "Oh, I almost forgot." She reached into the hallway and handed Ryan a plain white envelope. "I found this mixed in with my mail." Ryan's smile disappeared. He looked at the return address. Even from where I stood, I recognized the logo. The same mortgage company. Ryan slipped the envelope into his jacket almost instantly. "Thanks. Everything all right?" He forced a smile. "Yeah, just paperwork." Grace studied him for a moment, then said something so quietly I almost missed it. "You can't
Putting this off forever." Ryan looked down at the envelope. "I know." "No." Grace gently touched his arm.
"You really don't." Ryan didn't answer. He simply nodded, picked up the grocery bags, and carried them inside. I stood frozen behind a maple tree. For the first time, I realized something that changed everything. Grace wasn't helping Ryan hide the truth.
She was trying to convince him to tell me. I drove home in complete silence. Not because I finally understood what was happening, because I didn't. If anything, I was more
Confused than ever. Grace wasn't acting like someone having an affair. She wasn't nervous. She wasn't possessive. She wasn't asking Ryan to leave me. She sounded concerned. Concerned about me. That didn't fit any story I'd been telling myself. Ryan came home a little after 6. He walked through the front door carrying an empty grocery bag. Not the flowers, not the prescription. Just the folded paper bag. You beat me home. I got out of my appointment early. Good, he smiled. How's the tooth? Still attached. I was hoping for a dramatic story. Sorry to disappoint. He laughed. The same easy laugh I'd heard outside Grace's house an hour earlier. For a split second, I wondered if he ever felt exhausted from switching between two worlds. Or maybe, to him, there weren't two worlds at all. Maybe he genuinely believed they belonged together. That evening, after dinner, Lily disappeared upstairs to work on a scholarship essay. Ryan went into the garage to organize his tools. I carried a basket of laundry toward our bedroom. As I passed the garage, I heard him talking on the phone. His voice was low. Not secretive, just respectful. I got it. A pause. No, she doesn't know. Another pause. I understand. He sighed. I'll figure something out. I stopped walking. Not close enough to spy. Just close enough that my heart refused to let me leave. Then I heard the words that made me freeze. No, Grace. I said I'll tell her. Silence. Then Ryan spoke again. I know I've waited too long. Another long pause. I just need a little more time. The garage door creaked. I stepped away instinctively and continued upstairs before he could see me. My hands were shaking. Grace wasn't asking him to keep the secret. She was asking him to end it. That night, I couldn't stop thinking about one sentence. I'll tell her. Not if, when. Which meant Ryan had intended to tell me. Eventually. But how long had eventually lasted? Months? Years? The next morning, I did something I wasn't proud of. I searched our filing cabinet. Not because I wanted to invade Ryan's privacy. Because I was tired of feeling like a guest in my own marriage. Every tax return, every insurance policy, every investment statement. Everything was organized exactly the way Ryan always kept it. Neat, labeled, color-coded. Nothing unusual. Until I reached a small accordion folder in the back. It wasn't hidden.